Welcome to Storytime with Texas Red. I'm Paul Halprin, also known as Texas Red, and I'm going to tell you another one of my true stories. The title of this story is Scottsdale to Sunrise, or How Texas Red Became a Horse Wrangler. Okay, here's the story. My lack of attention and out-of-control lifestyle contributed to the demise of the new family sporting goods business in Phoenix, which, by the way, was my only source of income. I needed money, and the only thing I could come up with to make a living was playing music again. But I wasn't getting many gigs, even after opening for Mose Allison at Balcony Hall in Scottsdale. Some hippie friends from my brief time in Hollywood in 1968 and 69 had moved to Alpine in the White Mountains of eastern Arizona. When we were all in Hollywood, we were smoking hash and doing acid when I decided to walk away from a coveted job in the movie business and squander a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Once again, a decision with no rational explanation. After less than a year in Phoenix, in the summer of 1975, I decided to pack my white 1966 Chevrolet Bel Air, head up to the White Mountains to see my friends, get high, and take stock of what was happening in yet another new environment. After I arrived in the White Mountains, I started checking out local establishments in the tiny mountain community of Alpine, and I met the owners of a rustic vacation resort named Talwee Lodge. Talwee had guest cabins, a bar and restaurant with a stage and a dance floor, and hiking and horseback riding in the trails of the amazing Apache National Forest. After introducing myself as Texas Red and listing my background playing music over the previous few years, the owners offered me a summer job playing music at the resort. The gig came with a paycheck, a room in the lodge, and an open bar tab. Now I was set. I had a place to stay, a gig that paid a little money, and an open bar. Before I even unloaded my car, I met my coworkers. My fellow employees were a wild-ass bunch. They were Gary, who had the reputation as the baddest street fighter in Tucson, and Kim, a beautiful young woman from Chandler, Arizona. Gary was handsome, 6 feet tall, blonde, blue eyes, and solid steel. He wasn't afraid of shit. Kim was 5'8", brown eyes, long brunette hair, a captivating smile, and a great sense of humor and adventure. She also wasn't afraid of shit. Kim and I connected immediately. I've used the term before. It was instant intimacy and instant romance. We were together in my cabin whenever we weren't out riding horses and drinking, and when she wasn't doing housekeeping, and when I wasn't playing my gig. It turned out to be the beginning of a lifelong relationship. Every chance we got, the three of us and several of our coworkers would grab some horses from the stable, saddle up, and go riding among the quaking aspens and ponderosa pines in the Apache National Forest. We were usually drinking heavily, so riding was always more than just a casual trail ride. It's fair to say that after 12 years of drinking, from high school to college, to LA, Santa Cruz, Louisville, and now in the mountains of Arizona, I'd become a full-blown alcoholic. The owners of the lodge were excited about my solo show and decided that my performances at Talwee needed to be enthusiastically promoted around the nearby mountain communities. It needed to be more than just Texas Red appears at Talwee. The owners had a graphics person create day-glow orange posters and signs with big black letters, and they posted them all around the area. The promo material proclaimed, Talwee presents Texas Red Summer Entertainment Seminar. I think the seminar part was my rambling monologue, spontaneous comments, and jokes between songs. I not only played my solo gig, drinking heavily the entire time, but on the weekends, I played with a country band named Randy Lee and the Rebels. One packed and raucous Saturday night, a fight broke out on the dance floor while the band was playing. As usual, I had been drinking, and I ignored the cardinal rule of playing in a band, which is, if anything crazy happens in the venue, just keep playing. But no. I put down my guitar, stepped off the stage, and jumped into the fight, trying to break it up by grabbing and holding one of the fighters, who happened to be a young local guy. Tawi was up in the mountains. It was a family resort. And next thing I knew, people were screaming that I was choking the kid. The highlight of the moment was when the kid's mother started grinding her lit cigarette into my cheek. I was already pretty numb, so I didn't feel a thing, but it did leave a mark for a while. The Tawi gig lasted the entire summer. I don't know how, but I never got fired, and in the fall of 1975, I returned to Phoenix and moved in with Kim and her sister Dana in a duplex in Chandler, Arizona. I was still driving the '66 two-door Chevy Bel Air, but it was time for something more suited to my lifestyle and traveling. I bought a beige '71 Dodge pickup, and Kim and I outfitted it with a used camper. The truck took me to gigs in sleazy bars in Phoenix, places where I could make a few bucks and drink all night. Kim and I also took a short trip across the border into Mexico, where late one night I got lost on the way back to the U.S. border and got pulled over by a Mexican cop. Fortunately, I knew what to do. I gave the cop some cash, he gave me directions, and we headed for the border. A fun fact that proved to be critically important. When I was in Alpine, I bought a little horse named Otis Bars. He wasn't even old enough to ride. A friend brought him to Phoenix for me and dropped him off at a stable near Chandler. In November of 1975, as a result of my time at Tawi, I was offered an audition to do a solo gig at the bar at Sunrise Ski Resort on the White Mountain Apache Indian Reservation. That was an amazing opportunity. Sunrise was a beautiful resort and hotel, and that meant I had to get my ass up the mountain to Sunrise right away. However, the battery had died in my truck. I was flat broke, and the only source of cash I had was little Otis Bars. I sold Otis for $10, bought a used battery, installed it in my truck, and headed up the mountain to Sunrise. The weather was crisp and clear when I left Phoenix. Note that Phoenix is at 1,086 feet elevation, and where I was going was 9,200 feet elevation. About halfway up the mountain, in what would normally be a 4-hour drive, it began to snow, and snow, and snow some more. The wind was intense, and it was fucking snowing sideways. Visibility was shit. The windshield wipers could barely keep up. I had zero money and no hope if I turned around, so my only choice was to crank Johnny Winter on the cassette player and tell myself to just keep going. At that point, I learned the meaning of the term whiteout blizzard. I'll never forget the moment after my 6-hour white-knuckle drive in the blizzard through the snow. I finally saw the sign for the entrance to Sunrise Ski Resort. I turned in, kept going through the driveway, a foot deep in snow, and didn't stop until I was stuck, high-centered in a snowbank in front of the hotel. Once I got inside the hotel and got warmed up, I was greeted first by staff and then by Frank Grant, the Sunrise general manager. The White Mountain Apache tribe hired Frank from a big hotel in Las Vegas. Frank was a smooth-talking, well-dressed Vegas guy who'd been around, and the tribe was determined for him to run their business like a Vegas hotel. Frank and I had common interest in music, and somehow we seemed to speak the same language. I think he was just amazed that I survived the blizzard. He told me I could settle in and do my audition at happy hour the next day when the ski area closed and the skiers came back to the bar. I thought I'd hit the jackpot when Frank arranged for me to have a room and meals in the hotel. The next day at happy hour, I set up my gear, played, sang, and gave rambling commentary and made wisecracks about whatever came to mind. Frank was pleased. The audition went well, and I got the gig. My new job was to play in the Sunrise Hotel bar at happy hour from 5 to 9 after the ski area closed and the skiers and ski area staff came back to the hotel. Initially, I wasn't too popular with the employees at the resort, including the ski patrol, the restaurant workers, the front desk, and the bar staff. Why wasn't I popular? Because I was given a room in the hotel and all my food and beverage was comped, while the rest of the staff was living in trailers in the ski area a bus ride from the resort. I was a local celebrity of sorts. Sunrise was pretty remote. The closest bar was Molly Butler's Lodge, 30 miles away in Greer, Arizona, and in the winter, the drive could be treacherous. That meant I had a captive audience from 5 to 9, a captive audience of partying, college-age skiers from the Phoenix and Tucson ski clubs, a crowd that took the happy in happy hour quite literally. They were nonstop ordering round after round of trays of brightly colored tequila sunrises, and I was the star of their show. I sat on a stool next to my Fender twin reverb amp, and I played blues and a long list of songs that were not on the top 40, including Dave Van Runk's Cocaine Blues, a real favorite with the crowd. My Fender twin reverb amp is 26 inches wide. In a minute, I'll explain why that dimension is important. I'll admit, from my stool, I had the best view of the crowd, and I was always looking to make eye contact with a potential after-hours date. The songs I played weren't popular hits that the skiers knew, and my show quickly turned into a drinking exhibition, augmented by spontaneous wisecracks and a reputation for instigating sexually charged mayhem. As I described before, it was a room full of attractive, college-age skiers who came to party. I drank anything people would buy for me. One of the crowd pleasers was a drink I'd learned a few years before from Jack Cassidy, the bass player of the Jefferson Airplane and Hot Tuna. The drink was the Flaming Green Lizard. It's a pony glass full of green chartreuse, a 110 proof liqueur lit on fire. The trick was to shoot the whole thing at once so you didn't set yourself ablaze inside or out. When I finished a drink, I'd put the glass on top of my guitar amplifier. And as the night went on, there would be shot glasses, beer glasses, cocktail glasses, pony glasses, even champagne glasses. And by the end of the night, the top of my 2-foot wide amplifier would be a graveyard of recently deceased drinks. And now, on to the sexually charged mayhem. In the basement of the hotel, there was a sauna, and according to the sign on the wall, it was large enough to accommodate 8 people. On many nights, when I finished my last song, by which time everyone, including me, was pretty drunk, I'd shout, "Party in the sauna!" And a wild group of male and female skiers with booze and pot would head downstairs. In various stages of undress, they'd stuff as many bodies as possible into that sauna. There was drinking, smoking, and every manner of debauchery. We definitely violated the 8-person limit. Over time, a competition developed between the Phoenix and Tucson ski clubs to see which team could get the most people into the sauna. I think the record was 22. In one of those late-night sauna parties, I saw a very attractive young woman I had repeatedly made eye contact with during my gig. We hadn't been in the sauna very long until we grabbed each other and hugged, and next, we held hands, we left the sauna, and went upstairs to the hotel's front desk. No one was working at that late hour, so I went behind the desk, grabbed the key to the only unoccupied room in the hotel, where she and I went and had sex for a few hours. We had to find an unoccupied room because one of the young women who regularly came up to go skiing and to see me was sleeping in my room. Everything seemed like good, clean ski resort fun until the next day at happy hour when I showed up to play my gig. I sat down, put on my guitar, adjusted my mic, and looked up. There, at the table in front of me, was the young woman from the night before with a male companion. To this day, I don't know if it was her friend, boyfriend, or husband, but I spent the entire evening wondering whether this guy knew what had happened. My answer to the question, like to all questions, was to just keep drinking. Sunrise was incredibly popular, and there were always large crowds at the ski area. People waiting for the chairlift, skiing, hanging out on the deck, and in the bar. Because I had my days free, I could spend time at the ski area or in the hotel until it was time for my gig. People knew I was the resident musician, and because of that, I met a whole lot of people, including many of the female skiers. On occasion, a random meeting at my gig or at the ski area turned into an after-hours date, which always ended up in my hotel room. Over time, there were several of these short-term flings that became relationships. For the skiers, I believe there was always an element of, what the hell, I'm on vacation. During the course of the week, I'd get calls from some of the women I'd met explaining they wanted to come up to ski, but the hotel was expensive and booked, and they asked if they could stay in my room for the weekend. Okay, it was friends with benefits for everyone involved, and everyone went home happy. After a wild, drunken ski season, Frank wanted to keep me employed, but there weren't enough tourists to support my happy hour gig on its own. The resort was owned by the White Mountain Apache tribe, and they provided horses for trail rides in the summer. And I had some experience with horses from my time at Talwiwi. Frank the GM decided I could be the horse wrangler and guide and take tourists on trail rides during the day. I was even allowed to take a big box truck, drive to the seat of the White Mountain Apache tribe, and pick up a big load of hay for the horses. Now I was the Sunrise Wrangler. And in an attempt to make friends with a real Arizona cowboy, who clearly had no use for a long-haired hippie masquerading as a wrangler, I committed to a long cross-country ride with the stable owner from Molly Butler's Lodge at Greer. Cowboy Jim was about 6'2" and looked like a pro wrestler in a cowboy hat. He had a huge horse and real cowboy gear. On the other hand, I had a little horse from the tribe named Bullet. Bullet was small, but would never stop running. I had plain old tack, but I had decent spurs. One beautiful afternoon, for 4 hours, we rode around the White Mountains, and that big old cowboy was sure he'd lose me, but thanks to a great little horse and the fact that I was in pretty good shape from working in the stables and loading hay all summer, we stayed together the whole ride. Big Cowboy Jim's frustration was apparent, but he never said a word. On Sunday, August 22nd, 1976, I celebrated my 30th birthday at Sunrise, working as the horse wrangler. That Sunday afternoon, a large group of tourists from Phoenix showed up in front of the resort, requesting a 1-hour trail ride. I'll describe the scene. There was a huge, flat, open field adjacent to the hotel, which was perfect for inexperienced riders to get accustomed to riding. At the far end of the field was a trail that led into the mountains. The basic 1-hour experience was a long ride across the field, then into the Apache National Forest for a ride along the trail among the quaking aspens and ponderosa pines. It was truly breathtaking. I spent every day outside in the mountains, and I knew the weather, and I also knew there would be a thunderstorm with lightning later that afternoon. Standing in front of the hotel, there had been times when I had actually seen lightning touch down in the field, right where we went at the beginning of every trail ride. It could be scary. We were at 9,200 feet elevation. I explained the thunderstorm and lightning risk to the tourists, but they desperately wanted to go on a ride, and they probably didn't believe what the long-haired musician disguised as a wrangler was telling them. Because it was my fucking birthday, and I didn't want to get caught in a thunderstorm or be on a horse in an open field where I would be susceptible to getting struck by lightning, I told the tourists I'd take them out. But if a storm developed, they were on their own. This, by the way, was 100% against resort policy. And I'm sure none of that group took me seriously. I went to the stables with a coworker, saddled Bullet and 4 horses, and returned to the hotel. We all mounted up and headed out on the ride. As predicted, we were 30 minutes out, as far away from the resort as we would typically go, when the sky got dark, the storm rolled in, and all hell broke loose. There was thunder, lightning, and a downpour. At that point, I said to myself, fuck this. It's my 30th birthday. I'm not dealing with lightning. I'm going back to the hotel. I turned Bullet around and at a full gallop made it back to the hotel in a matter of minutes. About a half hour later, the angry hotel guests rode in. They were soaked, and they bitched non-stop about me abandoning them. Though I did get shit for deserting the guests, Chef Emer, the resort chef, was sympathetic and made me a flaming cherries jubilee for my birthday. To hear the chilling end of my sunrise saga, please listen to Storytime with Texas Red, Episode 1, entitled Sunrise and the BIA.